In this tutorial, we'll render an image sequence and turn it into a final video for the product. So right now I have an existing animation of let me jump over to my render cam here so we can see this, of just a cube getting smaller, just so we have something to render. Just as a point of reference for this animation, the animation is just location and scale. We can see placing the keyframe here and clicking and dragging here is going to set a keyframe there, then moving forward and adjusting those properties and keyframing them out. I also jumped over to the graph editor. And you can see with the item selected, you can grab the individual components. I'll focus here on scale and then use this to focus on that. Right. And then just selecting, as I do a rubber band selection here, it is going to select all of them. And then I can elongate to help the timing and the spacing thereof. Right. So just grabbing those and giving it a little bit of ease in a rapid succession. So we can see that it's staying a little bit close and then it drops down for the scale. Okay, and then same thing for the location. Location, you might have to make that a bit bigger or concentrate on one at a time. And sort of similar here, just allowing it to live a little bit longer and then drop off and then ease into the final position. So that's just a quick look at the graph editor. Great, so I am in my, and this is just 40 frames. So I'm gonna go to the little printer icon here, which is our output properties. I'm just gonna duck this down to 50% so we don't have to wait around for the final product. So that'll be 960 by 540 for the final resolution of the render. I am working with 24 frames per second. I'm starting my render at frame 1 and I'm going all the way to frame 40, which is what we see here. Let me switch back to the timeline so we can see that these numbers are also reflected right here. So those are live and connected. I'm outputting this just to a folder in the desktop, and note here that the file format is an image file. So you have these movie files here, and then you have a bunch of image files over on this side. Note the OpenEXR, which is an excellent compression for compositing. We're just going to go with PNG just because it's going to be a bit faster for this. And then from here, we can start that render. You can also go into color management or some of the other properties that might be helpful for you for this. Okay, so you can check the render. You should always check an image of the render just to make sure that there's no problems. This is fine for what we need. I do have a light in the scene, which is just the default light, and I am looking at this with the default lighting session as well. And we can also see that the render image is going to give us an idea of how long that specific frame takes to render. So you can sort of estimate, how long this render is going to take. So if I come in here to render animation, so Control F12, it's going to execute the command of that render. Let me go ahead while that's happening to open up the project folder for this. And what we'll find in the project folder under render example is that we have one image file for every single frame. And that's what we're looking for. However, this is not, and it's done, right? It went really quickly. This is not a final product. So the first way that I want to show is inside of Blender. So one of the things that we have with this is that now we have a final render that is already a PNG sequence. So many of the times, the problem arises that if you're trying to animate out an FFmpeg video let me just go into here for a second, for an mp4 file format or any type of file format. Maybe it gets through like to here and then it completely crashes and you lose all of those frames, or this is a much longer process. So the nice thing about this, particularly when you are using different render engines that can take a long time to render every single frame, you had all of that work done, but because it doesn't fill up and successfully render all of the frames, then it fails and you lose all of that work. So in this way, if it does fail, we will find that the first, in this case, 21 frames were still part of that final product. But then you can just change your product to be the start at 22 and go to 40. So you can do batch rendering for this, which is really helpful. So this is where, I want to keep it open source. I will also show a solution within the Creative Cloud desktop app. But right now we do have a sort of simple animation with all of the frames currently rendered, whether it's in batch render or one-time seeded. We can do this in Blender. It isn't perfect, but the difference here is it's no longer rendering the image. It's just kind of interpreting the PNG, which is compressed, and recompressing it within the FFmpeg container. So let's get over to that. And to do this, the easiest way is to open up a video editing workspace. So I'll come here to video editing and just open up video editing. You could do it here. The other one that I like to use is the rendering one. So let's just go into the video editing here, and you'll see the different format for this. So note here that I still do have my properties over here, which we are still looking at the output settings right here. So you can see there's a lot of channels, and if you're used to any of these nonlinear editors, this can be helpful for you. So all I'm going to do inside of here, inside of the sequencer, keep in mind that you could also retask this to the video sequencer. And I do believe, let me just check this, you do have to have the image as sequence add-on active here. So, I guess not. That might be, oops. That's for image planes. So we should be good to go with this. And I am working in 3.2.1, so which is a little bit old at this point, but should be fine for anybody engaging with this tutorial. So as we come in here, I'm just going to position my playhead at the very start frame, just so that it starts that sequence there. And come here to add, and notice how it says image/sequence. So I'm going to select that one, navigate to my project folder that has all of these, and I'm going to select this, scroll all the way down, hold down Shift, and select the last one. So I have everything in a continuous selection so that it is going to load that in. Right, you can see how it's importing here, and I'm going to say add as image strip. And as we step through this, you'll see that the animation plays, but it is just sort of using this as a flipbook with this. Okay, inside of the, we could also do that inside of here. I think we were here. So yes, you can see how this is still working inside of here. So with the output settings selected here, I'm keeping this from the previous one. At least, well, I should get this to 960 by 540 at 100. It's unfortunate because I imported it when this was where it was before. So it's just going to maximize the 960 by 540 just to cut it back down to 960 by 540. But that's fine for the tutorial. You just want to manage that so that it matches your the expectation of the project. I still have the start and end frame here, and I'll still render it into this folder. That's fine. But I'll push it over to FFmpeg, where previously we had PNG. Okay, from FFmpeg, you don't want to stop there. I would come over here to the encoding. This, by default, it'll give me an MKV file. I'm going to switch this over to MPEG-4 or mp4, and then just adjust the settings for the video codec as needed. I'll keep it at the defaults here. H.264 is a good compression, but you may want to spend more time if you want it to look really good. It's same for the encoding speed here. There's no audio in my project, so I'll keep it here at no audio. And now I'm ready to render this out as an image, or as a MP4, sorry. So down here at the bottom, let me see here, where is this? It should be under, see if it's, thought it was in this menu set here. I thought it was in the menu set, but it's not, which is fine. So we'll just come up here to rendering and choose render animation. We're still executing the same commands here. So render animation. The thing we don't really like about this is that it is, again, super compressing the object, but it is helpful just to see how this final product can be made. So here we see it in that same folder. I see the MPEG-4, right? And we can see that it does have all of those. You can see the quality disruption, primarily because this was 960 by 540. I pushed it up to 1920 by 1080 and then cut it back down to 960 by 540. So again, this is a nice way to work with image sequences within Blender that you can get to a final product if you are having failed attempt after failed attempt of rendering your final footage. If you would prefer not to do this inside of Blender, Blender is still really working on the video editing piece, so it does still feel a little bit clunky, but there's a lot of great additions that have been happening in this area, so it's definitely one to watch. But another way that we can do this is inside of the Adobe suite. So here, of course, this is a paid solution, so you would need a paid Creative Cloud access, but I'm just going to jump into After Effects here and do the same thing so you can see what the final product is here. My recommendation is typically to render out using Adobe Media Encoder or AME. So I'm going to launch both of those software packages, this one right here. You do also have the option to render natively inside of After Effects. So if you do choose the pathway that I'll point to it when you'd want to do it natively inside of After Effects. But Media Encoder, it's built to do just that, encode media. So it is just in my opinion, a superior method for rendering at this level. So I'm going to pause this real quick so that I can get both of those up and we can move forward. Okay, here we are in After Effects, and I just closed the welcome screen, but all I'll do here is choose New Composition, or you know what, actually what we'll do is just do it within the import. So over here in the project panel, I'm just going to right click and say Import and File. I could also hit Control-I or go to File, Import, File. From there, I'm going to navigate to my project folder, which for me is on the desktop, and I think it's just called Render Example. Right, and inside of this, oh my goodness, that's fine. Here we go. So inside of my folder, I'm just going to stack it against name and click once on the very first PNG of my image sequence. And down here at the bottom, notice how it does understand that there is a sequence that are PNG as the file format. So it's going to load that as footage, and that's exactly what we want. So I'm just selecting the first one in the sequence, making sure that that is selected and that it is importing as footage, and I'm going to choose import. The problem that we'll have, and I'm just going to expand the project panel here so that we can see the frame rate. Typically, I stack my frame rate closer to this this name component because it does tend to truncate this area, so you can't scan on it. Notice how the frame rate by default does interpret this at 30 frames per second. If you remember in Blender, we had this at 24 frames per second. So I definitely want to adjust this, and it's a few clicks away. I'm going to right click on this object that's causing the problem, tell it to interpret the footage and choose main. Notice the hotkey here of Control Alt and G. From there, you can see that the very first thing that is highlighted is the frame rate, and it's telling it to assume this frame rate. I'm going to enter the value of 24 there and click OK. I do also want to note that this window is pretty long, so if you do have a smaller laptop and there's no like scrolling device here, you can simply, as soon as this window pops up, just enter the value of 24 and tap enter on your keyboard. And you can see how this can be really, really easy. If you hit the Control-Alt-G, 24, and tap enter, you can do it within a second. So that's what I would recommend, and the hotkeys valued there, Control-Alt-G, the value of 24, and enter. I'm simply going to click and drag this down to the new composition icon right here. So it's going to create a composition with the existing set, and we can see that happening here. If I have that selected, notice it's 960 by 540 because that is the value that I have here, and it is also interpreting that at 24 frames per second, and it's also making the time line exactly enough to fit my existing sequence. We could always adjust this by right-clicking on this and choosing Composition Settings, or with the composition selected in the project panel. This is something I want to do to the composition, so that will direct me to the composition menu set up at the top. So with it selected, I could also go to Composition Settings, or with it selected, just hit Control-K. Right, and here's all of the different properties that I can manipulate about the composition. Note that this is not the image sequence, it is just the container that's holding the image sequence. Okay, so wonderful. And of course, you can add anything that you'd like right on top. So maybe you want to add a text layer to for whatever reason, but that's for a different tutorial. Right now, we're just trying to get from an image sequence to a final mp4 file. I'm ready to render this, and this is where we have two options. I knew I sat down inside of After Effects and I wanted to render, so I launched Adobe Media Encoder as well as After Effects. Sometimes Media Encoder takes a minute to launch. So with the comp selected, this is again something I want to do to the composition. So I'll go to composition up at the top and choose add to render queue if I want to use the native render engine inside of After Effects, which it used to be called Make Movie, which is why the hotkey here is M or Control M, or centered around M, I should say. But you can see here now it comes to the render queue. It's saying, hey, we're about to render this comp, right? This one that we have right here with our best settings at H.264, and the location that it's saving out is not yet specified. I can change any of these settings by clicking on the blue sort of touch me color inside of After Effects. And here's again where we can see, just sort of review that it is 960 by 540. It is 24 frames per second. And we're trying to do this in the best full quality for this product. So usually you're not changing anything in the best settings, but notice as soon as I open that, it's like, oh, you touched something. So it is going to flip it over to custom, even though I didn't change anything. For the output module, this is where you may want to change things, and I'll click once to open it. The first thing that we want to adjust is the format. So depending on the final product that you want, maybe QuickTime or H.264, you would want to set that format. From here, we can then adjust the format options. So this is where you can adjust how it's going to render, how it's going to work with that, et cetera, et cetera. So notice here how like this stuff is very different than if I went over to something like our PNG sequence and now I just have like one option, right? So you do have to adjust the format first and then adjust the format options as needed. So in this case, you likely would want to go H.264 or QuickTime, right? The format options for QuickTime animation is a horrid video codec. Maybe people will fight me on that. I'm not sure. But the H.264 is typically where you want to be for that for most, final products. So something like that. But like I mentioned, this native render, it is getting better, but it's not quite as robust as Adobe Media Encoder. And then finally, if you did want to jump inside of here, you would just need to click here to say where you wanted it to save, right? That's kind of like a file save. Once you have all of your settings, you would just tell it to render, and then it would go through the process and hopefully render successfully for you. I'm going to close this because I don't want to render within the native render engine. I want to render with Adobe Media Encoder or AME. So same sort of process. I'm going to select this comp, go to composition up at the top, and say add to Adobe Media Encoder queue, right? And notice here how it says ... which means it has other things to do and other things for me to decide in order to execute that command. If you didn't have AME open at this time, it would launch AME for you with that command. Sometimes that launch does get stuck, right? So we have, because I had this open, it was a little bit easier to execute that command and it didn't time out sending over the comp, which I see here coming from After Effects, into the queue for Media Encoder. So this is what it should look like if it's done successfully. Sometimes what you'll find is that Adobe Media takes a long time to launch, and then I think it times out, and then just nothing is over here. If you don't see anything over here, but Adobe Media Encoder does successfully launch, just jump back over and say composition, add to Media Encoder queue again, and it should look like you have it here for this final product. Now that we have it here, we need to adjust the format or the preset as well as the output file here. So under format, I'm going to click once on that blue touch me color. It's going to dynamically link to the server to get the most updated information. And both of these things, both the preset and the format, can be adjusted, by clicking, it both leads to this export settings window. Usually the first thing that I recommend that you engage with when you open up the export settings is this blue ribbon down here at the bottom. Notice how it is taking the work area from After Effects, right? So that's this little section right here into account and that's the default. It's only going to render that work area. So sometimes you might have this truncated down because you were working on a specific part of the animation and you don't realize that you're only going to render half the comp. So you can also customize that, right? Even if you didn't want to do it inside of After Effects. So I could scrub to a spot. Maybe I want it to start here. So I could place that there and say, yep, start there and end here, right? And I'm only going to render that component for this next set. Or you may want to have the work area, right? Set your work area before you push it over to Adobe Media Encoder and use that knowing that it is going to be the default render settings for start and stop. My entire composition is what I want. And that is also happened to be the my work area inside of After Effects. So those two are the same for me at this time. But that is the first thing that I would encourage you to look at. Are you rendering the same amount of information as you intended to when you started out? Once we solidify that we're rendering what we want, and you can scrub through to find it if you need to, we're going to come over here to the export settings. First up is the format. So you got a lot of formats here, which is awesome. That's why we're in Adobe Media Encoder. This is what it does, and it does it well. For this example, I am going to use H.264, which will give me that mp4 final format. For the most part, you are going to want to match the source and keep it at that high bit rate, but do note that you do have some other common locations that you can ship to. So for example, if you're trying to port to YouTube, you could stack all of these and then render all of them with one click through Adobe Media Encoder, which is excellent. This is also where I can save the product. So by default, it is going to put it in a temporary folder. But again, I'm going to jump over to my, let me find this here, to my project folder, my render example. And I'll just put this, I'm going to save it as comp.mp4 inside of that folder. At this point, you can tell it don't export the video. Sometimes this will shave off a few megabytes if you don't have any audio associated with that. Mine is so small that it really doesn't make a difference, but sometimes that can help in the final product. We do know, and I'm just going to jump back to high bit rate here. The only reason that that changed was because I messed with some of these and then it switched over to custom. But I just want to highlight here that match source is taking the source, right? After Effects is the source, and it's matching everything that After Effects gave to it. So in this case, we can see the source and what it's matching right down here. It's going to render out as 960 by 540 at 24 frames per second, and all of these render properties. Notice here how I am clicking and dragging on this small section right here, because if you do use the scroll wheel, as you start to engage with some of these, let me find the one that like right here, if you hover over this and start to scroll, it's actually going to change the value of that target bit rate, which is a problem. You may not realize that you're doing it. You're like, oh, why isn't this scrolling? And then you kind of move your mouse a little bit and you didn't even realize that you changed that value. And that can have some really negative impacts to this. So I would encourage you to use click and drag on here. I'm just going to switch it back to match source just to make sure that that value didn't adjust. But that is an area where you can get kind of nasty stuff happening to your final product. It is worth mentioning, although I'm not going to cover it in this tutorial, that there are effects that you can produce inside of Adobe Media Encoder. I would encourage you to do these inside of, other than maybe the timecode overlay, I would encourage you to do these mostly inside of your whatever product you're using, whether that's Premiere or After Effects in this case. You do also have an audio setting and some other sections that I do encourage you to work with, including the publish, right? So if you do want to publish directly to TikTok and to Vimeo and to YouTube and Behance and Facebook and X all at the same time in one click, this is a wonderful way to really publish a lot of that social media content by just flipping over to this published content and filling out the required products there. This bottom section is the last one. We're going to keep these at the default, but the estimated file size here we can see as a preview of 2 megabytes, which is excellent. So I've done everything that I wanted to inside of the export settings. So I'm going to click OK. And those are the two things that we have adjusted. The preset was the the match source high bit rate, which I did customize because I clicked around a little bit, but it did still match the presets. And then finally, this is being inherited from that location that we saw before when I adjusted it right here. But we could, if we skipped over that, we could adjust that right here. I'm ready to render this, but I do also want to mention that you could duplicate this and adjust it to whatever other settings that you want. So this is where you could have a bunch of different content that you then, push to whatever, final product you're looking for. I don't want that. So I'm just going to subtract this from the queue. It does give you a little video or a little pop-up here saying like, hey, you're just removing this from the queue. You're not actually deleting the After Effects file. It's just that you're deleting the instruction set to render this particular selection. So it's just letting you confirm that you understand that. So we'll hit play here to let it render through. And it's because it's so small, it is going to render very quickly. And you'll notice that we have our composition here, which now is allowing me to see that final mp4. So those are, I guess, technically three different ways. One way inside of Blender, which to me still feels a little clunky, but is definitely worth a watch as we continue to see the development inside of that open source platform. The second one, just being inside of After Effects, if you don't have the space for Adobe Media Encoder on your computer, to download that, or it's taking forever. So you can do this natively inside of the Control M hotkey. But the best way, in my opinion, currently would be to work if you have the Adobe contact and the ability to work within the page structure there, is to flip it through Adobe Media Encoder. Happy rendering.